The logbook's spine is cracked, its pages brittle and yellowed with age. Most entries are mundane, detailing late arrivals or complaints about raccoons. But one entry, under Site B12, is different. It's written in a shaky, frantic hand. It starts with a simple, chilling tally. 6 check-ins, 5 checkouts. My name is Sam, and I was the camp host at Oak Creek National Forest for 5 years. What I'm about to tell you is the reason I left that job, and why I can no longer stand the sound of whistling in the dark. It was late October, the season winding down. The air was crisp, and the leaves were a riot of orange and red. A beat-up minivan, the kind with wood paneling on the sides, rumbled up to my host site. A family of 6 spilled out. 2 parents, Mark and Sarah, and their 4 kid-stew teenage boys, a preteen girl, and the youngest, a boy named Leo, who couldn't have been more than 7. They were a boisterous, happy bunch, excited for one last camping trip before winter. I checked them in for Site B12. It was one of our more secluded spots, nestled deep in a grove of ancient oaks at the edge of the campground. It bordered a vast, undeveloped stretch of the forest. As I handed Mark the site tag, I gave them my standard spiel. Keep your food locked up. Bears are active. Watch out for rattlesnakes on the trails. And please, respect the quiet hours after 10 p.m. Mark just laughed, ruffling Leo's hair. Don't worry, Sam. We're seasoned pros. The first night was quiet. I did my usual rounds, the crunch of my boots on gravel, the only sound besides the crackling of distant campfires. When I passed B12, they were all gathered around the fire pit, roasting marshmallows. The father, Mark, was telling a story. His voice, a low murmur. The kids were listening, their faces glowing in the firelight. It was a perfect camping scene. I smiled and continued on my patrol. The next afternoon, Sarah, the mom, stopped by my camper. She looked a little rattled. "Hi," she said, wringing her hands. "This is going to sound strange, but did you hear anything last night? Any animals?" I told her I hadn't heard anything unusual. Just the usual coyotes yipping in the distance. She shook her head. No, this was different. It was a whistling sound. It sounded like a person, but wrong, off-key. It seemed to be circling our tent, just outside the light of the fire. I tried to reassure her, it's probably just the wind in the trees, or maybe another camper messing around. Teenagers, you know. She didn't look convinced. "And Leah," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. He said he saw something. His side, a big skinny dog with bright eyes, was watching him from the woods. I felt a small prickle of unease. We had coyotes, but none I'd call a big, skinny dog. Still, a child's imagination can run wild in the dark. I told her to keep a close eye on him, and to make plenty of noise if they heard anything again. That evening, the atmosphere felt different. A heavy silence had settled over the campground. As dusk fell, I saw the family at B12 again. They weren't laughing and telling stories. They sat huddled close to the fire, their backs to the deepening woods. Little Leo was practically sitting in his father's lap, his eyes wide as he stared into the darkness beyond the ring of firelight. The cheerful glow of their lantern seemed small and fragile against the immense blackness of the forest. I was in my camper around midnight, finishing up some paperwork, when I heard it, a scream. Not a playful shriek, but a raw, terrified cry that was cut short. It came from the direction of B12. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and my radio and ran. My heart was pounding against my ribs. I've heard plenty of strange sounds in the woods, but nothing like this. When I reached their site, it was chaos. The fire was dying, casting long, dancing shadows. Sarah was sobbing, clutching her teenage daughter. Mark was pacing back and forth, his face pale with panic, shining his own flashlight frantically into the trees. The 2 older boys were standing frozen, staring at the empty space where their brother's sleeping bag should have been. Leo was gone. Mark grabbed my arm, his eyes wild. He was right here. He yelled, his voice cracking. He just needed to use the bathroom, just at the edge of the site. He was gone for 30 seconds. We heard a weird whistle, then a scream, and he was just gone. We searched for hours. Me, the family, and eventually, 2 sheriff's deputies. I called on the radio. We combed the area, calling Leo's name until our voices were hoarse. The only thing we found were a few scuff marks in the dirt near the edge of the woods, and one small, abandoned sneaker. There were no other tracks. No blood, nothing to explain how a 7-year-old boy could vanish without a trace. The search continued for days, expanding to include search rescue teams and volunteers. They found nothing. The family, broken and hollowed out by grief, finally packed up their minivan. As they drove away, Sarah stared at me through the window, her eyes vacant. There were only 5 of them now. I watched them go, a cold dread settling deep in my bones. At the host site, I opened the logbook. I looked at the entry for B12. With a trembling hand, I crossed out the number 6 and wrote a 5 next to checkouts. The story should have ended there, but it didn't. A week later, I was doing my final rounds before closing the campground for the winter. The place was deserted, an eerie ghost town of empty campsites. As I passed by site B12, a flicker of movement in the trees caught my eye. I froze, aiming my flashlight beam into the darkness. 2 bright, yellow eyes blinked back at me from the brush. They were too high off the ground to be a coyote, and too far apart. Then I heard it. A low, off-key whistle. The same whistle Sarah had described. It drifted from the trees, a chilling, unnatural sound that mimicked a human tune but was twisted, distorted, and woven into that terrible whistling. I could hear a faint, small voice. It was a child's voice, whispering a single word, over and over again. Help! Help! It sounded exactly like little Leo. My blood ran cold. The thing in the woods slowly stepped out of the shadows and into the beam of my flashlight. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't a coyote. It was tall and emaciated, its limbs long and jointed at odd angles. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, like dark, leathery hide. But the face was the worst part. It was shifting, melting, trying to form a human face, but not quite succeeding. And from its throat came that awful, double-layered sound. The grotesque whistling and the desperate, stolen voice of a little boy. It took another step toward me, its head cocked to one side, its bright eyes fixed on mine. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe. I just dropped my flashlight and ran. I scrambled into my truck, fumbled with the keys, and peeled out of that campground without looking back. I drove all night, not stopping until the sun was up and I was hundreds of miles away. I never went back. I left everything: my camper, my belongings, my job. I couldn't face it. I couldn't face the thing that wore the voices of the people it took. So when you see an old logbook that says 6 check-ins, 5 checkouts, remember this story. Remember that some places in the woods are best left alone. Because sometimes, when you hear a familiar voice calling from the darkness, it's not who you think it is. It's just the bait. Thanks for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this chilling tale, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel for more unsettling encounters from the deep woods. Stay safe out there, and whatever you do, don't follow the whistle. The desert has a way of playing tricks on you. The heat bends the light. The silence makes you hear things. And the emptiness, well, the emptiness can fill your head with all sorts of fears. I learned that lesson the hard way, out on a solo trip to Arizona, near a place the old maps call Sunrise Pass. It was supposed to be a journey of self-discovery, a way to disconnect from the noise of the city. But what I found out there wasn't silence. It was something waiting. It all started on the 3rd day. The sun was a brutal, white-hot coin in the sky. I was low on water, my truck kicking up a plume of reddish dust that coated everything. That's when I saw it. Off in the distance, a dust devil was forming. It wasn't unusual. I'd seen dozens, but this one was different. It was tighter, and it moved with a strange, unnatural purpose. Instead of dancing randomly across the flatlands, it was heading straight for the road, straight for me. I slowed the truck, more out of curiosity than fear. I even pulled out my phone, thinking it would make a cool video. As it got closer, maybe 100 yards away, the spinning column of dirt and debris seemed to thicken. It wasn't just a random whirlwind anymore. It felt solid, focused. Then, for just a second, the swirling dust parted, and I saw it. A face. Not a human face, but something long, gaunt, with hollowed-out eyes that seemed to burn with a cold, ancient malice. It was the face of a coyote, but twisted, elongated, and standing impossibly tall within the heart of the storm. My blood ran cold. The phone fell from my hand, clattering onto the passenger seat. This wasn't a trick of the heat. This wasn't a mirage. I slammed my foot on the gas, the engine screaming as the tires bit into the gravel. I didn't look in the rear-view mirror, but I could feel it. I could feel those eyes on my back, a predatory weight that pressed down on my soul. The dust devil wasn't just a weather phenomenon. It was a vessel, and something was wearing it like a cloak. I drove for what felt like hours, not daring to slow down until I hit the paved highway. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, but the beauty was lost on me. All I could see was that horrifying, elongated snout and those empty, soulless eyes. I kept telling myself it was dehydration, heat stroke, anything but the truth. But Ike knew. I'd read the stories, the local legends whispered by old-timers in dusty roadside diners. Stories about the Skinwalker, beings who could take the form of animals, who could command the very elements of the land they haunted. That night, I didn't camp out as planned. I found a cheap motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and locks that barely worked. But I didn't care. I just needed walls around me. I triple-checked the door and wedged a chair under the handle. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the whirlwind. Every gust of wind against the window sounded like scratching, like claws on glass. I heard a dog barking frantically somewhere in the distance, a sound that was abruptly cut short by a pained yelp, followed by a terrifying, echoing silence. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding in my chest, until the first hint of dawn. I knew I couldn't stay. This thing, whatever it was, knew I had seen it. It had marked me. The legends say they are drawn to those who recognize them, that they are offended by the gaze of outsiders. I had not only seen it, I had looked into its face. The next morning, I packed in a frenzy. As I loaded my gear into the truck, I noticed something on the dusty windshield. A single, perfect handprint, except the fingers were too long, far too thin, and ended not in neat fingernails, but in what looked like the impressions of sharp, curved claws. It was a message. A warning, or maybe a promise. I didn't finish my trip. I drove straight home, the desert shrinking in my rearview mirror. But the fear followed me. It's been months, and I still don't feel safe. Sometimes, on windy days, I see trash and leaves swirling in the street, and for a terrifying second, I think I see a shape forming within it. I've started locking my windows, even in the middle of the day. I find myself watching the neighborhood dogs, seeing if they stare at something I can't see. The desert doesn't forget, and neither do its oldest inhabitants. I went out there looking for solitude, but I found something else. I found a truth so terrifying it has unmade my world. The whirlwind at Sunrise Pass wasn't just wind and dust, it was a hunter, and it showed me its face. And now, every time the wind howls, I can't help but wonder if it's coming to find me, to finish what it started, wearing a new face, a new form, walking in a storm of its own making. I don't know why it let me go that day. Maybe it was a game. Maybe it was just showing me how powerless I was. But I can tell you this. If you ever find yourself alone in the great, empty spaces of the world, and you see a storm moving with unnatural purpose, don't stop. Don't watch. Don't film. Just drive. Pray that your engine doesn't stall. And whatever you do, don't look for a face in the whirlwind, because you might just find one, and it will be the last thing you ever want to see. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If this sent a chill down your spine, please hit that like button and subscribe for more encounters from the edge of our reality. Stay safe out there, and always be aware of what the wind might be carrying. The sound of wind chimes usually brings a sense of peace, a gentle melody on a summer breeze. But not anymore. Not for me. No, that sound is a harbinger, a chilling reminder of what I saw at the Four Corners gas station, long after midnight. It was the sound that introduced me to the thing that wore the chimes, the thing that wasn't human. My cross-country trip was already running behind schedule. The digital clock on my dashboard glowed an angry 1:17 a.m. as I pulled into the loneliest gas station I'd ever seen. It was a single, flickering oasis of light in a vast, dark desert somewhere in the heart of Navajo Nation territory. Day sign read Four Corners Gas, but it felt more like the edge of the world. The wind was howling, a mournful, empty sound that seemed to carry whispers from the surrounding mesas. I just needed gas and a strong coffee to push through to the next town. That was the plan. Anyway, as I stepped out of my car, the wind hit me with a physical force, and with it came that sound, a discordant, frantic clanging. It wasn't the gentle tinkling of wind chimes. It was a chaotic, metallic jangling. I looked up and saw them hanging from the awning of the station's small convenience store. They were made of bone and antlers, twisting violently in the gale. An old Navajo man was sitting on a bench just outside the door, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, seemingly unfazed by the storm. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, and his eyes, dark and deep, were fixed on me. "Nasty night to be out," he said, his voice raspy, barely audible over the wind. "The spirits are restless." I offered a nervous smile and mumbled something about being in a hurry. He just nodded slowly, his gaze drifting back to the darkness beyond the gas pumps. I tried to ignore the unsettling feeling crawling up my spine and went inside. The store was empty except for a young woman behind the counter, who looked as tired as I felt. I grabbed a coffee and paid for the gas, the clanging of the bone chimes somehow penetrating the glass and walls. It was unnerving, like an alarm bell you couldn't turn off. "What's with the wind chimes?" I asked, trying to make small talk. She glanced outside, a flicker of fear in her eyes. "The owners," he says, "they keep things away." She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Back at the pump, the wind seemed to have gotten stronger, and the jangling was more frantic than ever. I fumbled with the gas cap, my fingers numb from the cold. As the tank filled, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The old man was still there, a silent statue on the bench. The desert stretched out into an impenetrable blackness, and I felt a primal fear of being so exposed. That's when I heard it again, mixed with the wind and the chimes. A voice. It was faint, mimicking the sound of a woman crying for help. "Please, help me." My head snapped up. I scanned the darkness. Nothing. It had to be the wind, playing tricks on my tired mind. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself I was just spooked. But then I heard it again, closer this time, from the direction of the public restrooms around the side of the building. "Please, I'm hurt." The voice was filled with such desperation, such genuine pain, that my resolve to leave immediately began to crumble. Was someone in trouble? I looked over at the old man on the bench. His eyes were wide now, locked on me, and he gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. A clear warning. My logical brain screamed at me to get in the car and drive. But the sound of that woman's cries pulled at something in me. Against every instinct, I started walking toward the restrooms, my heart hammering against my ribs. The clanging of the bone chimes seemed to get louder, more frantic, as if they were screaming a warning directly at me. As I rounded the corner, the crying stopped. The air became unnaturally still. The restroom doors were propped open, swinging gently in the breeze. A single light above them flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Only the wind answered, whistling through the cracks in the old building. The sense of dread was suffocating now. I knew I had made a terrible mistake. I took a hesitant step closer, peering into the shadows. That's when I saw a figure huddled in the corner, just beyond the reach of the light. It was on all fours, its back to me. It looked wrong. The proportions were all off. The limbs were too long, the joints bending at unnatural angles. It was making a low, guttural noise, a wet, clicking sound. The smell hit me then, the coppery scent of blood and something else, something wild and musky. My blood ran cold. The figure's head slowly, mechanically, began to turn towards me. It wasn't human. The face was a grotesque parody, a stretched and distorted mask of flesh over a long, canine muzzle. Its eyes glowed with a faint, predatory luminescence in the dim light, and around its neck, tangled in matted fur, were the source of the jangling. Bones, antlers, the wind chimes. It let out a low growl, and then it spoke, its voice a perfect imitation of the crying woman. "Help me," it rasped, a cruel mockery that sent a bolt of pure terror through me. The creature unfolded itself, rising to a height that defied belief. It was impossibly tall, its gaunt frame silhouetted against the flickering light. It took a step towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette being controlled by a malevolent puppeteer. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat was paralyzed with fear. I just turned and ran. I've never run so fast in my life. The sound of its heavy, loping footsteps was right behind me, punctuated by that horrific, frantic clanging of the bones around its neck. I didn't dare look back. I could feel its presence, a wave of cold malice pressing in on me. I scrambled into my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life on the first try, a small miracle. As I slammed the car into drive, the creature was at my window. I saw its face for a split second, its glowing eyes burning with ancient hatred, its lipless mouth stretching into a grin that revealed rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. It raised a long, clawed hand and slammed it against the glass, the impact vibrating through the entire car. I stomped on the accelerator, tires squealing as I peeled out of the gas station, leaving a cloud of dust and gravel in my wake. I drove like a madman, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. For miles, I could see a tall, dark shape standing in the middle of the highway, bathed in the red glow of my taillights. And even over the sound of my engine and the radio I'd cranked to full volume, I could have sworn I still heard it. The faint, discordant jangling of bone wind chimes, carried on the desert wind. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up. To this day, I can't hear wind chimes without feeling that same icy dread. I don't know what that thing was, but the old man on the bench knew. He knew what the chimes were for. They weren't a decoration. They were an alarm. An alarm for the thing that hunts in the dark, the thing that mimics the innocent to lure its prey, the thing that wears the bones of its victims as trophies. So if you are ever driving through the desert late at night and you hear a voice calling for help, just keep driving. Trust me, some things are better left unanswered in the dark. Thanks for tuning in for another story. If you've ever had a similar experience out there in the remote parts of the country, I'd be interested to hear about it in the comments. The desert doesn't keep secrets. It swallows them whole. My grandfather used to say that. He warned me never to stray from the paved roads after dark, especially not near the old burial mounds at mile marker 34. He said the earth there remembers things that are best left undisturbed. I, of course, thought it was just old-timer talk, stories spun to keep kids from getting into trouble. I was wrong, horribly wrong. It all started 3 weeks ago, a camping trip with my two best friends, Liam and Chloe. We were looking for an adventure, a break from the city, and the stark, beautiful desolation of the Arizona desert seemed like the perfect escape. We chose a spot a few miles off the main highway, not far from those very mounds my grandfather had warned me about. The first night was perfect. The sky was a dizzying canvas of stars, the air crisp and clean. We told stories around the campfire, roasted marshmallows, and felt a million miles away from everything. It was on the second night that things began to unravel. It started subtly. A sound, just at the edge of hearing. A faint scraping, like stone on stone, coming from the direction of the mounds. We dismissed it as an animal, maybe a coyote. But then, it was followed by a low whistle. A tune that sounded disturbingly human, yet not quite right. It was airy, hollow, and it seemed to drift on the wind from all directions at once. Liam, ever the skeptic, grabbed a powerful flashlight and swept its beam across the darkness. Nothing. Just skeletal creosote bushes and the silent, watchful saguaros. Probably just the wind, he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Chloe was already spooked. She huddled closer to the fire, her eyes wide, scanning the oppressive darkness that encircled our little bubble of light. I tried to stay rational, to be the calm one, but a primal knot of fear was tightening in my stomach. The whistling stopped, and for a while, an unnatural silence fell over the desert. The usual chirps of crickets and nocturnal insects were gone. It was as if the entire landscape was holding its breath, waiting. That's when we heard the footsteps. They were heavy, bipedal, and slow, crunching on the dry gravel. They circled our campsite, always staying just beyond the reach of the firelight. Every hair on my body stood on end. Liam aimed his flashlight again, and for a split second, the beam caught it. Or, rather, them. 2 pinpricks of light, reflecting back from the dark eyes. They were low to the ground, too low for a person, but too wide apart for any animal we knew. They blinked once, slowly, and vanished. Panic started to set in. What was that? Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know, I managed to say, my own voice barely a croak. The footsteps continued their slow, deliberate patrol around us. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. It felt like we were being studied, sized up. The worst part was the feeling that came with Etha's suffocating sense of being watched by something ancient and intelligent. Something that knew we were trespassing. Liam, trying to be brave, shouted into the darkness. Who's there? Show yourself. The only answer was a chilling mimicry of his own voice, distorted and guttural, echoing back from the night. Who's there? It rasped, the sound seeming to come from the throat of something that wasn't built for human speech. That was it for us. Rationality flew out the window, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. We scrambled, throwing our gear into the truck with frantic, clumsy movements. We didn't even bother to put out the fire. As I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably, the footsteps quickened. They were no longer circling. They were approaching. Fast. I slammed the truck into drive, tires spitting gravel as we peeled out of there. In the rearview mirror, illuminated for a horrifying instant by our taillights, I saw it. It was hunched over our hastily abandoned campsite, long, spindly limbs unfolding as it rose. Its form was a nightmarish silhouette, vaguely humanoid but impossibly gaunt and twisted. It turned its head towards us, and even from that distance, I felt its gaze lock onto me. We didn't stop driving until the sun came up, and the city lights were a comforting glow on the horizon. We thought we had escaped. We thought it was over. The next few days were a blur of nervous exhaustion. We tried to convince ourselves it was a prank, or a trick of the mind, a shared hallucination brought on by isolation and campfire stories. But we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It followed us back to the city. I'd be walking down a crowded street and suddenly feel a cold dread wash over me. The same dread I felt in the desert. Liam started complaining about noises outside his apartment at night, the same scraping sound, the same hollow whistle. Chloe became a recluse, too afraid to leave her home after dusk. The real horror began a week later. I was trying to sleep when I heard it, right outside my bedroom window on the 2nd floor. A soft, clear whisper. Sam. It was my name. My blood ran cold. I crept to the window and peered through the blinds. On the street below, under a flickering streetlight, a figure stood perfectly still, staring up at my window. It was tall and emaciated, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. I couldn't see its face, but I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that it was the thing from the desert. The next day, a frantic call from Chloe. She was sobbing, barely coherent. It knows my name, Sam, she cried. It was outside my window last night. It whispered my name. That afternoon, Liam called. He sounded defeated, terrified. He had heard it. No, Liam, it had whispered, in that same dry, rasping voice. Liam. It had learned our names. How? We hadn't said our names out loud at the campsite. Not that I could remember. Had it been listening to us before we even knew it was there? Was it sifting through our fears? Our memories? The creature, the Skinwalker, was no longer just a desert phantom. It had followed us, crossed the boundary from its world into ours. It wasn't just hunting us. It was toying with us, dismantling our sense of safety, piece by piece. The city was no longer a sanctuary. It was just a bigger cage. The nights became a living torment. The whispers grew more frequent, sometimes sounding like they were right inside the room with me. I started seeing it in reflections, a fleeting, distorted shape in a shop window or a darkened TV screen. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Liam disappeared 2 nights ago. He just vanished. His apartment was unlocked, his phone and wallet on the table. The only thing out of place was the window, wide open, the screen torn as if by claws. The police have no leads. They think he just left, but Chloe and I know the truth. It took him, and now it's just the 2 of us. Last night, the whispering changed. It was no longer just my name. It started mimicking my grandfather's voice, repeating the words he spoke to me all those years ago. The desert doesn't keep secrets. It rasped from the darkness beyond my window. It swallows them whole. It knows my fears. It knows my memories. It's digging through my soul, looking for the softest spots, the deepest terrors. I'm recording this because I don't know what else to do. Chloe isn't answering her phone. The sun is setting, and the shadows are growing long. I can hear a sound outside, a slow, deliberate crunching on the pavement. Footsteps, and a low, hollow whistle that seems to carry on the evening air. It's closer this time. I think it's coming for me now. The desert is calling, and it's time to pay for what we disturbed. Don't make the same mistake I did. Stay away from the burial mounds at mile 34. Some things that are buried should stay that way. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had an experience like this, share it in the comments below. I'd be interested to know I'm not alone in this, if I even make it through the night. Do you forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories from the dark corners of the world? Stay safe out there, and whatever you do, don't listen to the whispers in the dark. The hum of the engine is usually a comfort on a long drive, a steady rhythm against the endless asphalt. But that night, it was the only thing standing between me and a silence so deep it felt like it could swallow you whole. I was driving down US 191, a ribbon of road cutting through the vast, dark expanse of the Navajo Nation Reservation in Arizona. My GPS, for reasons I still can't explain, had rerouted me onto a deserted back. It was supposed to be a shortcut, but as the miles stretched on, it felt more like a trap. The desert at night is a different world. The familiar shapes of cacti and mesas twist into monstrous silhouettes under the moonlight. My headlights were the only stars in a sea of black, cutting a narrow path through the oppressive darkness. I was starting to feel that prickle on the back of my neck, the kind that tells you you're being watched. I shook it off. Just road fatigue, Premier told myself. Just the desert playing tricks on a tired mind. I had been on the road for hours, pushing to get to Flagstaff before morning. The coffee was wearing off, and my eyelids felt like they were lined with lead. That's when I saw them. Up ahead, nestled in the scrub brush just off the shoulder, 2 small, bright circles glowed in my high beams. Road reflectors. I thought the kind you see on posts to mark the edge of the road. But these were odd. They were set low to the ground, almost at animal height, and they were spaced just a little too perfectly apart, like a pair of eyes. I kept driving, my gaze fixed on them. As I got closer, something was wrong, terribly wrong. Reflectors don't move. They don't adjust. These did. They seemed to track my car's approach, following the beam of my headlights. My heart started a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. Primera slowed dong, curiosity wrestling with a rising tide of fear. The logical part of my brain was screaming that it was just an anemala coyote, maybe a stray dog, its eyes catching the light, but no coyote I'd ever seen had eyes that burned with such an intense, almost intelligent crimson light. As I drew nearly parallel, I rolled my window down just a crack, listening. There was nothing. No sound, just the wind whistling past my car and the thumping of my own pulse in my ears. The 2 points of light remained fixed on me. They were unwavering, unblinking. Then, they blinked. It was a slow, deliberate blink, one after the other. It wasn't the quick flutter of an animal. It was methodical, human-like. A cold dread, sharp and icy, shot down my spine. This was no animal. My foot slammed on the accelerator, gravel spitting from under my tires as the car lurched forward. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. Not at first. Ihus strobe, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I finally forced myself to glance at the mirror, my blood ran cold. The 2 red lights were back, but they weren't on the side of the road anymore. They were in the middle of it, far behind me. But they were keeping pace. They bobbed and weaved with an unnatural speed, closing the distance far faster than any person or animal could run, faster than my car was going. Panic set in. Pure, undiluted terror. I was pushing 90 on a road I didn't know, a road that was little more than a dirt track in places. The car fishtailed, and I wrestled with the wheel to keep it straight. The red lights just kept coming, getting closer and closer. They were large enough now that I could see they weren't just lights. They were attached to something. A shape, tall and gaunt, was beginning to form in the darkness behind them. A lanky, disjointed figure that moved with a horrifying, jerky gait. It was running on 2 legs, but its limbs were too long, its movements too wrong. It was like watching a marionette being controlled by a madman, its arms and legs swinging at impossible angles. It was gaining. I could hear it now, over the roar of my engine. A dry, scraping sound, like claws on asphalt, and a guttural, wheezing breath that sounded like it was being torn from a ruined throat. My mind was screaming the word I'd only read about in folklore forums and creepypastas, a word whispered in these parts of the country with genuine fear. The shape was right behind me. I could see it in my rearview mirror, its horrifying form illuminated by my tail. It was thin, almost skeletal, covered in what looked like patchy, matted fur. But its face. Its face was a warped, elongated mockery of a human's, with a gaping mouth and those 2 burning, malevolent eyes. It raised a long, spindly arm, and for a terrifying second, I thought it was going to reach right through the rear window. Then I saw the turn. A small, barely visible sign pointing back towards the main highway. I didn't hesitate. I wrenched the wheel, the tires screaming in protest as I took the corner way too fast. The car slid, almost spinning out, but I corrected, my foot never leaving the accelerator. I risked another look in the mirror. The creature had stopped. It stood at the intersection, a tall, dark silhouette against the desert landscape. It just stood there, watching me go. The red eyes burned into me, even from that distance. It wasn't chasing me anymore. It was just watching, as if it was letting me go, as if the chase was a game, and it had simply grown tired of playing. I didn't slow down until I hit the bright, familiar lights of the US 191 Primera. Pulled over, my body shaking so violently I could barely breathe. I sat there for what felt like an hour, just trying to get my heart rate back to normal. The rest of the drive to Flagstaff was a blur. Every pair of headlights felt like a threat, every shadow on the side of the road a potential monster. I've never told anyone this story. Who would believe me? They'd say I was tired, that I was hallucinating. But I know what I saw. I know the feeling of being hunted by something that isn't supposed to exist. I still have nightmares about those 2 red lights, the reflectors that blinked back, and I will never, ever take a Reservation Backroad detour again. Some shortcuts aren't worth the price, and some things you see in the dark will follow you long after the sun comes up. Thanks for tuning in for another story. If you have your own encounter you'd like to share, or just want to hear more tales from the shadows, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Stay safe out there, and always check your mirrors. You never know what might be reflecting back. Have you ever heard a sound so wrong, so out of place, that it made the hair on your arms stand up and your blood run cold. Primera, B, and I wish I hadn't. It was the sound that led me into the heart of a nightmare, deep beneath the Arizona desert, in a place where the earth itself holds its breath. It all started with a bet. My buddy, Leo, and I were urban explorers, or at least, that's what we called ourselves. We are mostly just bored 20-somethings looking for a thrill. We'd heard whispers about the old Black Mesa uranium mine, abandoned since the 70s. The place was a local legend, not just for the radiation warnings plastered all over the fence, but for the stories. Tales of prospectors who went in and never came out, of strange lights in the sky above the entrance, and of whispers carried on the wind. Old Navajo folks in the nearby town would just shake their heads and mutter. Some places are best left to the dust. Leo, of course, thought it was all a big joke. He found an old map online, a supposed layout of the upper levels. $100 says we can get to the main elevator shaft and back in under 3 hours. He'd challenged me, grinning like an idiot. I was hesitant, but the lure of adventure and proving Leo wrong for once was too strong. So, last Saturday, under the pale light of a sliver moon, we cut a hole in the chain link fence. The air that hit us from the mines, gaping maw, was stale and cold, carrying the faint, metallic temps of decay. It was like the earth that exhaled a lungful of ancient secrets. We clicked on our headlamps, their beams cutting sharp cones through the oppressive darkness. The entrance tunnel was wide, reinforced with thick wooden beams and rusting steel. Our boots crunched on gravel and dust that hadn't been disturbed in decades. The silence was the first thing that got to me. It wasn't just quiet. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, as if the very air was too dense for sound to travel. We pushed deeper. The map was surprisingly accurate. We passed collapsed side tunnels and derelict ore carts, frozen in time. Graffiti from other explorers, most of it years old, covered the walls. "Don't look back," one scroll warned. Leo just laughed and took a picture. About an hour in, we found what we were looking for. The main vertical shaft, a black hole that plunged into the planet's guts. A rickety-looking cage lift hung suspended by thick, rusted cables. This was our goal. "See? Easy peasy," Leo said, his voice echoing unnaturally in the vast chamber. He was about to suggest we head back when we heard it. It started faint, a low, mournful hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't human. It was a siren, a slow, wailing cry that rose and fell in a haunting cadence. It was the most beautiful and terrifying sound I'd ever heard. It resonated in my bones. A siren's call promising what? We looked at each other, our bravado gone, replaced by a primal fear. "What is that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Probably just the wind in a shaft," Leo said. But he didn't sound convinced. His eyes were wide, darting into the darkness around us. The siren wailed again, closer this time, and it was followed by something else. A whisper. It was soft, like the rustle of dry leaves, but it was clear. It sounded like my mother. "Michael," it whispered. "Come home, honey. It's late." I froze. My mom had passed away 5 years ago. My blood turned to ice water. I looked at Leo, whose face was a mask of pure terror. "Did you hear that?" He nodded slowly, his Adam's apple bobbing. It sounded like my dad," he choked out. "He called me Leo, but no one's called me that since I was a kid." The siren's song swelled, wrapping around us, and the whispers multiplied. They were voices of our past, of Lobodons calling to us from the darkness, beckoning us deeper. It was a cruel, psychological trap, and it was working. Part of me, a deep, grieving part, wanted to follow that voice, wanted to see my mom again, no matter how impossible it was. But then, another sound cut through the chorus of phantom whispers. A scratching. It was the sound of claws on rock, coming from a tunnel just to our left. It was a rhythmic, deliberate sound. Scrape, scrape, scrape. And then, a low growl that was nothing human. It was guttural, predatory. "We need to go. Now," I said, grabbing Leo's arm. The spell was broken, replaced by sheer, undiluted panic. We turned and ran, our headlamps bouncing wildly, painting chaotic strobes of light and shadow on the tunnel walls. The siren faded, but the scratching grew louder, closer. It was keeping pace with us. We could hear it, just behind us in the dark, a frantic skittering that was impossibly fast. We sprinted through the labyrinthine tunnels, our lungs burning, our minds screaming. The map was useless now. We were just running towards the memory of the entrance. The whispers came back, no longer soft and beckoning, but sharp and mocking. They twisted the voices of our loved ones into taunts and jeers. "You can't run," my mother's voice hissed. "You were always such a disappointment." We burst back into the main entrance tunnel, the faint gray light of the outside world, a beacon of hope. But something was standing there, silhouetted against the entrance. It was tall and painfully thin, its limbs too long, its joints bent at unnatural angles. It was draped in what looked like a tattered coyote pelt, its head a nightmarish fusion of animal and human. Its eyes, they glowed with a faint, malevolent red light, like the embers of a dying fire. It wasn't moving, it was just watching us, its head cocked to one side as if studying a particularly interesting insect. We skidded to a halt, trapped. Behind us, the scratching predator from the tunnels. In front of us, this thing. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and damp earth. The creature at the entrance slowly raised a long, spindly arm and pointed a clawed finger at the side wall. My headlamp beam followed its gesture, and what I saw made my stomach heave. The wall was covered in fresh carvings, scratched into the rock. They were symbols, ancient and geometric, but arranged in a spiral. And in the center of the spiral, there were faces, dozens of them, crude, terrified faces, their mouths open in silent screams. Below them were names. I saw Prospector John, 1952. I saw Hiker Sarah, 1988. And I saw newer ones. Chris and Amy, 2017. It was a gallery of the lost, the minds, victims. Then, the creature did something that will haunt me until my dying day. It opened its mouth, a jagged slash in its horrifying face, and the siren's call poured out. It was the source. It was singing its beautiful, deadly song. And as it sung, the whispers started again, but this time, they were all around us, coming from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. The voices of the faces carved in the rock, a chorus of the damned. The scratching behind us stopped. A new sound began, a wet, tearing sound, followed by a low chuckle that was a perfect imitation of Leo's laugh. I didn't dare turn around. The creature at the entrance took a step towards us. It moved with a jerky, disjointed grace that was utterly wrong. It wasn't walking. It was uncoiling. The whispers intensified, weaving into the siren's song, creating a symphony of pure dread. Stay. They seemed to say join the song. Join the wall. Leo screamed mad. It wasn't a human sound. It was the shriek of a soul being torn apart. I risked a glance over my shoulder. In the flickering light of my headlamp, I saw another one, shorter, broader, its form shifting and contorting, wrapped in the remains of a security guard's uniform. It had Leo. Its claws were buried in his shoulder, and as I watched, its face began to melt and reshape itself, morphing into a twisted, screaming caricature of Leo's own face. I didn't think. I just acted. There was a derelict or cart to my right, filled with loose rocks. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, I shoved it with all my might. It groaned and rolled, picking up speed as it careened down the slight incline of the tunnel, straight towards the creature at the entrance. The thing Siren sung faltered for a second as it turned its glowing eyes towards the rumbling cart. It sidestepped with impossible speed, letting the cart crash into the tunnel wall. But it was the distraction I needed. I scrambled past it, out of the mine's entrance and into the pre-dawn glow. I didn't stop running. I ran through the scrub and cactus, ignoring the thorns that tore at my clothes and skin. I ran until the black maw of the mine was just a dark spot on the horizon. I ran until I collapsed on the asphalt of a deserted highway, my lungs on fire, my body shaking uncontrollably. I never looked back. I left Leo in there. I left him to become another face on the wall, another voice in the Siren song. They found me at dawn, a rambling, incoherent mess. They said I was suffering from dehydration and exposure. They searched the mine, of course. They found our gear. They found the hole in the fence. They found the carvings, but they never found Leo. They never found any sign of a struggle. To them, it's just another case of a missing person in the vast wilderness. But I know the truth. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right, I think I can hear it. A faint, mournful siren on the edge of hearing. And sometimes, in the quiet of my room, I hear a whisper, a familiar voice, a twisted version of Leo's laugh, calling my name from the darkness. The mine is a trap. The siren is the bait. And the whispers are the last echoes of those who listened. I got out, but I left a part of myself in that mine. And I know, with chilling certainty, that one day it will come back to claim the rest. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever found yourself drawn to places you know you shouldn't be, maybe think twice. Some whispers are best ignored. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories from the dark. Stay safe out there. The summer of '98 was a scorcher on the reservation. I was 17, working at my uncle's old trading post just off the main highway. It was a dusty, sun-bleached place, filled with the scent of old leather, dried herbs, and gasoline from the single pump out front. Most days were a slow crawl of tourists, buying turquoise jewelry and locals grabbing sodas. But it was the nights that held a different kind of stillness. A heavy silence that my uncle always said you had to respect. One evening, just as the sun was bleeding purple and orange across the horizon, a man I'd never seen before walked in. He was tall, gaunt, with eyes that seemed to swallow the light. He didn't say a word, just stalked the aisles. His movements unsettlingly fluid, almost like he was gliding. He bought a can of beans and a strip of jerky, paid with exact change, and left. But what struck me was his smell like wet dog and something else. Something coppery and old. After I left, the air felt thick, heavy with a tension I couldn't name. I locked up early that night, the silence of the desert pressing in on all sides. The next day, my uncle's prize-winning sheepdog, Buster, went missing. We searched everywhere, calling his name until our throats were raw. The old folks in the community exchanged knowing glances, their whispers filled with words I was taught not to say aloud, especially after dark. That night, a strange whimpering echoed from behind the trading post. It sounded like Buster, but wrong. It was higher, strained, and it would stop and start abruptly. I crept to the back window, my heart hammering against my ribs. In the pale moonlight, I saw a figure hunched over near the big, Joaquin icebox we used for storing meat and game. It was the same tall man from the day before, but his shape was shifting, contorting in the shadows. He was mimicking Buster's whimper perfectly. A chilling, cruel imitation. I backed away from the window, my blood running cold. I knew then, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that we weren't just dealing with a missing dog. My uncle, a man who had seen more than he ever spoke of, just nodded grimly when I told him what I'd seen. "Stay inside after sundown," he said, his voice low, "and don't answer to anything that calls your name." That night, the whimpering was replaced by a different sound tapping. It was coming from inside the icebox. A slow, rhythmic tap. Tap. Tap against the thick metal door. But that was impossible. The icebox was empty, and my uncle had secured it with a heavy-duty padlock that afternoon after I told him my story. He'd even said, "Nothing gets in, and nothing gets out." The tapping grew more insistent. Tap. 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 It was a patient, deliberate sound, echoing through the silent trading post. I lay on my cot in the back room, pulling my blanket up to my chin, trying to convince myself it was just the pipes or the wind. But this was different. It felt intelligent. It felt like something was trying to get my attention. Then, a new sound joined the tapping. Low, scratching, like nails dragging slowly down the inside of the freezer door. My breath hitched. The padlock was on the outside. Whatever was in there had been locked in with the padlock, which made absolutely no sense. Unless it hadn't gotten in at all. Unless it was something that could just appear. Suddenly, a voice whispered from right outside my window. It was my mother's voice, clear as day. "Son, let me in. I forgot my keys." My heart stopped. My mother lived 50 miles away. I squeezed my eyes shut, reciting the one prayer my grandmother had taught me for protection. The voice came again, sweeter this time, pleading. "Please, honey, it's cold out here." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Then, the tapping from the icebox started again. Faster this time, frantic. Tap, 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 tap. It was an angry, demanding sound, and interwoven with it, I could hear that terrible, high-pitched whimper. The one that sounded like Buster but wasn't. I must have passed out from sheer terror, because the next thing I knew, the sun was streaming through the window. The trading post was silent. I crept out of the back room, my legs shaking. The padlock on the icebox was still there, untouched, but the metal around the lock was covered in deep, ugly scratches, gouged into the steel from the inside. My uncle came in a few minutes later, his face green. He didn't ask what happened. He just handed me a small pouch of sacred corn pollen. "Keep this on you," he said. "Always. Always." He walked over to the icebox, unlocked it, and threw the door open. It was empty, bone-chillingly cold and completely empty. But on the floor, right in the center, was a single, muddy footprint. It wasn't human. It was too long, too narrow, with claws that had dug into the frosted floor. We never spoke of it again. Buster never came back. Tourists still come and go, buying their souvenirs, oblivious to the night the desert tried to whisper its way inside. But I never forgot. I never forgot the tapping from inside the padlocked freezer, the voice that wore my mother's sound, or the impossible footprint left behind. Some things, once they've seen you, never truly leave. They just wait in the silence, in the cold, dark places, for you to forget to be afraid. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more Tales from the Shadows. Stay safe out there. The old wash behind our ranch was usually bone dry, a dusty scar through the Arizona landscape. But when the monsoon skies turned that bruised, purple-gray, it became a raging river. That's why Grandpa built the storm shelter down there, dug into the side of the wash wall, a solid concrete box to wait out the flash floods. He said it was safer than the house. I'm not so sure anymore. I was 12 the summer it happened. The air got heavy, thick, with the smell of rain and wet creosote. Dad's eyes were fixed on the horizon. "Get to the shelter, son. Now," he said, his voice tight. "Take the radio. I'll be right behind you after I get the horses in." I didn't argue. I grabbed the old hand-crank radio, a gallon of water, and scrambled down the crumbling bank into the wash. The wind was already howling, whipping sand into my eyes. I fumbled with the heavy steel door of the shelter, the metal, cool and damp. It swung open with a groan, and I slipped inside, pulling it shut against the rising roar of the storm. The inside was small, smelling of damp earth and concrete. There was a wooden bench, a shelf with some dusty canned food, and an old lantern. I lit the lantern, its warm glow pushing back the absolute darkness. The first fat drops of rain began to hammer on the steel door. Then, the real flood began. It wasn't just rain, it was a wall of water, a freight train of sound. The shelter shuddered. I huddled on the bench, cranking the radio, listening to the static-filled weather reports. An hour passed. Then two. The storm was supposed to have moved on by now, but the roar outside only seemed to get louder. Where was Dad? I started to worry. a cold knot tightening in my stomach. I called for him, my voice swallowed by the storm. Nothing. I was about to risk opening the door when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. It was a scratching, slow, deliberate. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was coming from the wall opposite the door, the one buried deepest in the earth. My blood ran cold. It was impossible. That wall was backed by 20 feet of solid rock and dirt. I froze, straining to listen over the torrent outside. Scrape. Scrape. Pause, scrape. It was methodical. Rhythmic. Scrape. It sounded like nails or claws being dragged across the concrete. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a root, shifted by the waterlogged soil. Maybe it was the shelter settling, but the sound was too intentional. My heart hammered against my ribs. I turned up the lantern, its light flickering, and stared at the wall. There was nothing there, just bare, gray, concrete. Scrape. It was louder now, more insistent. Primera. I pressed against the cold steel door, heart racing. Who's there? I whispered, my voice trembling. The only answer was the storm and that relentless, impossible scratching. Then came a new sound, one that made the hair on my arms stand up. A voice. It was faint, distorted by the stone and the storm. But it was there. It sounded like my dad. Son, let me in. It's me. Relief washed over me for a split second before a tidal wave of terror drowned it out. The voice wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the scratching wall. Dad. I called out, my voice cracking. I'm at the door. The scratching stopped. Silence, except for the raging water. Then the voice again. Closer. Clearer. Right against the concrete. No, you're not. It rasped. The voice a perfect mimicry of my father's, but twisted, guttural. You're confused. Open this wall, son. I'm stuck. I scrambled away from the wall, stumbling over the water jug. It wasn't him. My dad would never sound like that. He knew where the door was. The scratching started again, but faster this time. Frantic. A frantic scraping accompanied by a low, angry growl that vibrated through the floor. It wasn't trying to trick me anymore. It was trying to get through. I huddled in the corner, clutching the radio, my knuckles white. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to stop, for my real dad to come banging on the steel door. Hours crawled by. The scratching would stop for long periods, lulling me into a false sense of security. And then it would start again, sometimes with a soft tap, tapping, other times with a furious, splintering, clawing. It started counting, in that stolen voice of my father's. 1, it whispered from the concrete. I held my breath. A long pause, then a singly deep scratch appeared in the concrete. A dark line in the lantern light. I hadn't seen it happen, but it was there. 2, another scratch, right below the first. It was counting down. But to what? My mind reeled. The storm outside began to subside, the roar of the floodwaters lessening to a steady rush. But the horror inside the shelter was only growing. 3. Another mark was gouged into the wall. I watched, mesmerized in terror. The creature, whatever it was marking its time. Or maybe it was marking me. 4. The scratch was deeper this time. A fine gray powder drifted down from it. The voice was getting impatient, the mimicry of my father's voice fraying at the edges, letting a more ancient, animalistic sound bleed through. I knew about the old stories. The tailies, the Navajo elders, told us kids to keep us from wandering off. Stories of beings that could steal the voice and shape of a person. Beings of pure malice. I had always dismissed them as campfire tailies. Not anymore. 5. The clawing was frenzied. Chips of concrete flew from the wall. I could see a network of cracks spreading from the 5 vertical lines it had carved. Suddenly, a heavy banging on the steel door. "Son! Michael? Are you in there?" It was my dad's voice. His real voice. Full of worry. Coming from the right place. "Dad!" I screamed, scrambling to the door. "Don't open it!" The voice from the wall shrieked, a sound of pure fury. The scratching became a deafening, desperate assault on the concrete. "Michael, stand back from the door." My dad yelled from outside. I heard the sound of heavy metal scraping against the frame. He was trying to pry it open. The shelter was sealed from the inside. The creature howled, and a chunk of concrete the size of my fist broke loose and fell to the floor. A deep, dark hole was beginning to form. My dad's face appeared in the crack of the door he'd managed to pry open. His eyes were wide with fear. "What in God's name is that sound?" he yelled. "Don't let it out," I sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at the crumbling wall. He saw the marks, the hole. Without a word, he put his shoulder to the door and heaved. The warped metal groaned and finally gave way. He pulled me out into the muddy, post-storm twilight. We didn't look back. We ran. We ran all the way back to the ranch house, the sound of splintering concrete and a final, inhuman scream of rage echoing from the wash behind us. We never used that shelter again. In fact, the next day, my dad and my uncles went down there with a cement mixer and filled the entire thing, right up to the door. No one ever asked why. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right, I think I can still hear a faint scratching, and I know it's still down there, counting and waiting. Thanks for sticking with me through that one. It still gives me chills, just telling it. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales from the shadows, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had an experience you just can't explain. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.